Hey, what's going on, Warhammer World? This is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another Ninth Age battle report. And do I have a treat for you guys? So this is the first battle of a 5-game series from the OFCC tournament that just took place this past weekend down in Vancouver, Washington. If you guys managed to make it out, it was fantastic to meet you there. I saw we had a lot of great gamers there, and if you didn't make it out this year, well, hopefully they'll do it again next year, and I can meet you then. It'd be great. It's one of the few that we have in tournaments we have in the Pacific Northwest here. So I'm really appreciative that it was OFCC managed it and it was fantastic. So with that, I'll go and jump into the army. So for my army, I'm not going to present it here. It's in a brush and fluff video number 2, which should have been the video posted right before this one. So if you have any questions about my list, my army, please go back to that brush and fluff video number 2, and then you can go into it. So as the title suggests, this is Sharnuk's Desert Horde versus a group of lovely painted Saurian ancients. And so in this rendition, I will be playing Sharnuk himself. So to look at magic, my opponent had a level 4 Quetzal Lord with the white magic. You can see his spells here: Luminous Bolts, Blessing of Omar, Arcane Dissolution, and Cataclysm. So this was a great chance to play some different opponents, as well as playing different lores of magic. So far, none of my opponents had played white magic before, so it was a nice change to see new magic phases. For myself, I had a level 2 Beast Wizard who had the Swarm of Insects and the Beast Within, and then I had a level 2 Wizard due to the fact that he had the Wizarding Hood. And so for this particular round, I rolled up Heavens, and he had Thunderbolt and Blizzard as his spells. So going to deployment, on my opponent's left-hand side, he had a Skink Captain. The Skink Captain has this Dragon Scale Helm, the Razor Blade, the Egg of Quetzal, and he's riding an Alpha Ramphadon. Behind that is a Salamander. Next to that is a group of 10 Skink Braves. And next to that is a group of 26 Temple Guard with full command and having the Rending Banner. And in that group is the Cutter Lord of White Magic, who has a Dispel Scroll, the Shielding Soul, and the Wellspring of Power. Next to that is a group of 10 Raptor Riders with a Champion and Musician, and with those Raptor Riders is a Saurian Veteran on a Connoisseur with the Duskstone, Flaming Lance, and Potion of Swiftness. And I gotta say, that model was really cool to look at. I loved the paint job that my opponent did for the scales of the Connoisseur. I thought it was really well done. Over here on my opponent's right flank, he had a block of 30 Saurus Warriors with Spears, full command, and the Banner of Speed, as well as being upgraded to Jaguar Warriors, which also gave them a +1 movement. So these are movement 6, so they could just fly across the board. Next to them is another group of 10 Skink Braves, and finally a Salamander. So here's a look at my army. So again, I didn't write down what I have, but you can look at the brush and fluff video number 2 and get a look. So this is my right flank, and this is my left flank. You can see the penny next to my skirmishing goblins and next to my boar boys. Those are the targets for my opponent's Alpha Raphodon. So he gains double frenzy, I believe, and gains a couple other attributes against those 2 targets. So for this battle, it was a classic deployment with the secondary objective being hold the middle. Whoever has the unit with a banner within 6 inches of basically that big rock in the middle of this picture, to the right of this picture. So my opponent managed to drop the units off first, and so got the first turn. So Saurian Ancients, turn 1. So on my opponent's right flank, you can just see that they moved up the Skinks and the Salamander a little bit. And on the left flank, moved up, kind of using this big stone that was kind of like a shield to guard his flank. In Magic Phase, I don't have a picture of the dice, but my opponent managed to get Luminous Bolts off on my Spider Riders, because they were the only thing in range. I think I tried to dispel it, but I failed, and my 5 Spider Riders blew up. Luckily, they were insignificant compared to my Frenzy Farrier Warriors anyways, so my Orcs didn't care. In shooting, my opponent, as Skink Chief on the Raphodon, flew up and used his Egg Breath Weapon up on these Skinks, and killed, I believe, 8 or 9 of them. They failed the panic test and started to flee from the battlefield. And other than that, that was the end of turn 1. So that brings us to Sharnuk's Horde, turn 1. So in movement phase, you can see I moved up fairly aggressively. This is a very combat army, so I tried to move up as quickly as I could. On the right-hand side of this picture, my giant, he charged the Skinks, who stand and shot and did 1 wound, and then failed the terror test and ran away. I then directed my charge into the Salamander, which either my opponent elected to flee or also failed its terror test. I'm not quite sure. So as you can see, it's running in this picture. I did happen to rally my skirmishing goblins on the left-hand flank though, so they turned around so they could shoot at the skink on the Alpha Ravnon. In Magic Phase, I managed to get Thunderbolt off, and between Thunderbolt and my Git Launcher, I managed to kill 3 of my opponent's Raptor Riders, as well as you can see there's a small dice behind the Spearman, between the Star Warrior Spearman. I managed to drop a Web Launcher shot on those guys and killed off, I believe, 2 of them, and also decreased the initiative by 2 and webbed them so that they made any charges they would have dangerous terrain tests. That brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 2. So for charges, my opponent charged his Alpha Rapharon into my skirmishing goblins. They stood and shot and did absolutely nothing. On my opponent's right flank, he rallied both his skinks and his salamander, and they moved up as you can see. In Magic, my opponent got off the Blessing of Emir. This is a 5 of ward save. I believe he got it on the Raptor Riders, and I believe I attempted to dispel and failed. My opponent also managed to get off Luminous Bolts on my Iron Orcs. I believe 2 or 3 of them died, but nothing of significance. In close combat, the skink captain, yeah, he easily killed like 4 or 5 skinks. I failed to do any wounds when we turned, and I broke, and my opponent chased me off the board. So this is kind of what the battlefield looks like at the end of turn 2. So now we go to Sharnuk's turn, turn 2. Alright, so with some of the chaff a little bit out of the way, or at least maybe running a little bit out of the way, I decided that now is a good time to start moving my troops up even closer. So I cast the Beast Within on my Feral Orcs, intending to get them in target in close combat next turn. And other than that, I didn't do too much. My right flank moved up a little bit. I threw some fanatics at, or moved within range, so if my opponent charged me with his Saurian Warriors to my Cave Goblins, I could throw out some Mad Gets. My Giant, I believe, charged the Salamander, which once more turned and fled. Oh no, my opponent failed, passed the terror test, and I failed the roll to catch. So my opponent Salamander was actually just sitting about an inch in front of my Cave Goblins. So that brings us to Saurian Ancient's turn 3. So this is what the battlefield looked like before my opponent moved or anything, so you can kind of see what they look like. You can see that Salamander on the flank of my Iron Orcs there on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see that the Salamander had rallied and moved within, pretty much right next in front of my Cave Goblins. In Magic Phase, my opponent managed to get Luminous Bolts off once more on my Iron Orcs, and between the Luminous Bolts and the Salamander, I managed to kill off quite a few of my Iron Orcs, dwindling them down to, it looks about 16 or so, 15. Other than that, my opponent didn't want to get into close combat yet, especially with my Beast Within off on my Feral Orcs. So then I went to Sharnuk's Horde turn 3. So I charged my Iron Orcs into the Skink Chaff to get them out of the way, and charged the Giant into the Salamander, as you can see here, and then just moved the Goblins over a little bit to the left to release the Fanatics later this turn, or excuse me, the Mad Gets later this turn. For Magic Phase, I actually took a picture of my dice, and I managed to get 9 power dice. However, my opponent used his Dispel Scroll on this turn, and I got no spells off, so that was a little sad. In close combat, my Iron Orcs easily wiped out the Skinks. There's one Skink left. He's just above the left rock in here. You can kind of see him poking out. He never rallied and ran off the board. And on the right-hand side, you can see my Giant wiped out the Salamander and overran. However, I did take a wound from the Salamander, as you can see here. And yeah, that's just taking a picture of those dead Skinks. So this goes to Saurian Ancient's turn 4, and I forgot to take a picture of the dice. So this slide we'll have to do is the turn slide. So my opponent decided to go ahead and charge in now. So on the left-hand side, you can see the Raptor Riders that were, along with the Carnosaur, charged right into my Feral Orc Horde. And the Temple Guard also attempted to charge the Feral Orcs, but they needed, I get a 10, and they didn't quite make it. You can also see to the right of this picture, my opponent has fleeing Star Warriors at this time. They charged my Skinks, they charged my Goblins, who released the Mad Gets, and caused enough wounds that my opponent had to make a panic test, and failed, and ended up running back through the Mad Gets. So, and all in all, my Mad Gets ended up killing about like 15 or so Star Warriors, who then turned to the tail and fled after that. And I can't say I blame them. If I lost 15 in my number next to a crazy guy eating a mushroom, swinging a big chain around, I'd probably run too. So here's what the kind of left-hand side of the board. You can see my opponent charged their skink captain into my Git launcher, and I don't think I have another picture of that, but I can go and tell you that my opponent did kill my Git launcher. In Magic Phase, my opponent got Luminous Bolts off once more on my Iron Orcs, and managed to kill 2 more from that. And then Close Combat, my opponent decided to pop the Potion of Speed on his Saurian Veteran, and put all his attacks in towards my BSB. So he did manage to put 1 wound on my BSB, but my BSB had 1 wound left. However, then I got to strike back before his troops, and this is what it looked like after combat. So my opponent's Carnosaur did manage to take off the last wound and kill my BSB, but I wiped out all of the Raptor Riders, and I think my general put 1 or 2 wounds on my opponent's Saurus Veteran, excuse me. And this was an auto break for my opponent, so my opponent broke, and I, being frenzied, have to pursue because I am pretty bloodthirsty. And I managed to catch my opponent and wipe him out. So that brought us to Sharnuk's Horde turn 4. So in movement, I charged my Feral Orcs into my opponent's Temple Guard. He stood. In Magic Phase, however, I did manage to get the Beast Within off on the Feral Orcs. And then we went to combat, and unfortunately I was too excited and forgot to take a picture. And I wiped out his Temple Guard to a man, and even managed to put 1 wound on my opponent's Slan. Or, excuse me, Cuxalord. So that was just really bad luck, I think, on my opponent, because my being initiative 3, I had 1 more initiative than my opponent, and my opponent didn't even get a chance to strike before I wiped out his entire unit. It was an auto break, so he had to flee, and he actually did manage to get away. I pursued, but I failed to catch, so I fell about 2 inches short, as you can see in this picture. So that brings us to Saurian Ancient, turn 5. So my opponent did manage to rally his Slan and tried to move him as far as he could outside of the line of sight of my Feral Orcs, but unfortunately couldn't quite make it. My opponent did manage to cast Luminous Bolts off on my Feral Orcs, however, and managed to kill a couple of them. And on the right flank, charged the Skinks into my Cave Goblins. So that's kind of just what the picture it looks like after my opponent tried to move the way out of my line of sight. And that brings us to Sharnuk's turn 5. I didn't take a picture of the right-hand combat with the Skinks and the Cave Goblins. I think I easily broke him and ran him down, so that's why I don't have a picture of that. So Sharnuk's turn 5. My opponent's Salamander had kind of moved out from under my Iron Orcs. My Wizard with the 5 Orc Boys failed the Frenzy test and chased the Salamander and fought it in combat, broke it in combat, and ran it down, and ran off the board, actually. So that's what this picture is signifying. In Magic Phase, I managed to get Blizzard off on my opponent's Slan. Not that it really mattered. I was just kind of wasting dice at this time. And actually, this is the last picture I have. I don't have a picture of it, but I did easily manage to kill my opponent's Slan. And that was the end of the battle. My opponent had no more figures on the table. But overall, it was a fantastic game. I really enjoyed it. My opponent was a great opponent. This was my first opponent at a large tournament, and I gotta say he really made me feel welcome because I'd never been to a large tournament before, and I gotta say this first match was would be one of my favorite matches for years to come. It was a fantastic match, fantastic opponent, fantastic army. It was overall just a fantastic game. I really enjoyed it, and I hope my opponent did too. But other than that, this is the end of this particular video. So like I said, this is the first of a 5-game series of the OFCC. So if you guys want to leave feedback or comments, please do so, especially if I made any mistakes or my opponent made any mistakes that you caught during this video. Please point those out. And as always, hit like and subscribe. Game on!